So, just diving into the questions, while we know that becoming a parent for anyone is a life-changing experience, the birth of a child that needs to be in the NICU is very unexpected and it affects the entire family, particularly dads. And we want to start with Jim. How did the initial news of your baby's NICU admission affect your ability to support your spouse and family? And just what can you talk about what the staff could have done better to help the transition?
I'd say initially it just blew my ability to support everything to smithereens. We had my wife, she was hospitalized. She had very high blood pressure. She was having contractions. She got sent home on bed rest after a night's stay at Bothwell Hospital in Sedalia, Missouri. She got sent home on bed rest, and 6 hours later, we were back. Um, and at that point, so I was told to pack a bag and get ready to go to Columbia, Missouri to stave off preterm labor for her. And while I was doing that, I got a call that said her water broke. Get back here now. So he was delivered at 32 weeks. He was a hair under 4 pounds. Children's Mercy sent a team down via ambulance. Terrible thunderstorms that night, I remember. So they could not life flight him because Children's Mercy is about an hour and 40 minutes from Sedalia. Um, and I once he was born and I met the Children's Mercy team and they took him away via ambulance. I just felt hopeless. This was our first child. And you know, that situation where you expect where you and your wife are with your baby and everything's normal in the hospital. My wife was in need of medical care. My son was obviously in need of medical care. Um, and so I was handed a pamphlet and I said, Children's Mercy, that's the one on the hill, right? I wasn't familiar with the hospitals in Kansas City. Um, and so um, so I was worried about both of them and I just didn't know what to do. I felt like I had to try and keep things together. Um, so that was how I felt. I didn't have it together at all for probably the first 2.5 days. Recommendations. I mean, honestly, considering our positive experience with the hospital, my recommendations, and bear in mind, this was 16 years ago, mental health concerns for NICU families wasn't a thing back then. At least it really wasn't there. Um, I would say like the overarching message I give to staff is keep in mind that we parents, we're premature too. It's not just the baby. Um, so I think that you need to give a focus. You know, nurses do what nurses do. They are very skilled in what they do, particularly NICU nurses. They are a cut above everyone. I hold NICU nurses in very high regard. Um, because they need to provide some focus on soft skills like empathy, effective interpersonal communications. Um, I encourage them to ask questions, pay attention to warning signs, because they asked me, you know, are you doing okay? And I would look at them and tell them I was okay. And if my wife would have been there with me, she would have just looked at me and said, "You're not okay. You're not okay at all." Um, and I felt like I didn't know what a NICU was, didn't have the slightest idea what a NICU was. Um, this wasn't covered in what to expect when you were expecting. There's some chapters missing. Um, and I was raised by a nurse, by an intensive care and emergency room nurse, and I thought I understood how healthcare worked, and I didn't. Um, so I think also there needs to be some coordination among all areas of the hospital, have documentation and resources ready. Back when I was there, it was a folder full of with paperwork, and I just pushed it aside. I was in a huge hospital. I didn't know anything. So rely on just having those resources available, identified, so that if you have particular questions that you know where to be sent. Um, and I think lastly, I think everyone needs to be proactive, anticipate needs of families from intake to discharge. Every NICU experience is different, so this is hard to do. Um, but I think in the parents I've talked to and in our work with our group at Children's Mercy, that is a pretty common complaint of parents is that path to discharge is a little rocky at times. Um, so just try and have all those resources together and just make that experience as smooth as possible.
Thank you for sharing. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I thought Jim said it beautifully. Could you make quickly in our experience? Yeah, my wife was admitted. I already sort of revealed the diagnosis in the bio there, but she was just holding on for dear life, just trying to hold on to the pregnancy. Had a lot of bleeding intermittently, and at times they called it crime scene. It was intense, but um, had the smallest, slightest bleed on January 16th this year, and I just reported. We lived there. I lived in a recliner, and we would get consults every day from MFCU, from MFM. I would try to consult with NICU to just understand. Okay, if we deliver at this point, I wanted information, and yeah, I agree with Jim that like having a packet of paper just isn't going to do it. We did have a fellow come down and give us a real head to toe sort of the worst case scenario of possible if she delivered when she was admitted at 26 weeks. Luckily, she held on to 30. We had negotiated as best you can that, okay, with everything, we're going to go for 32 weeks. We feel like 32 weeks is good. But with the slightest bleed, maybe that was our son sort of giving a little warning of, it's getting kind of gnarly in here. And we took it as a blessing that it wasn't a 3 a.m. running down the hallway kind of situation. We wanted to avoid that at all costs. My wife needed a huge team to pull this off and to save her life. We needed just a large surgical team beyond just the delivery, which felt really strange. If I can just introduce that here as well, that as the father, I was, thankful to then accompany my son with the team to NICU and deal with the admission there. But I still had to leave my wife on the OR table. um, it's just odd, Here's this little being that, yeah, we've been planning on, and I've never really met before, and he's in an isolate, and he's intubated, and we're rolling upstairs. But my wife is, so it was intense, and so I then had the first 24 hours of running between NICU and ICU. And luckily, thank God, everyone made it through fine. But it was intense. I'm really thankful for the RNs. They're amazing. I agree with Jim. A cut above. You have to be a completely special human being to be able to navigate that world. Um, RTs, everyone was great. I had a lot of circular conversations with MDs, um, which seemed challenging, but I'm so thankful for the support that we received. RNs answered all our questions and were so supportive. Um, yeah, that's what I guess I can say in my experience right now.
Thank you for sharing, Brian. Yeah, it's tough to go back and forth. That's something that we hear a lot. What about Eugene?
Um, First instance, the 40 years ago, my wife it was at 23 weeks. It was interesting. That was an interesting situation for me because I was actually skiing in a lake about an hour south of there. I don't even know how people got a hold of me because it was before cell phones and pagers. I don't, by the grace of God, I even found out by the time I got to the hospital, the baby had already been born, was already on oxygen, 100 beats a second or whatever. And next thing I know, a nurse is handing my dead baby to me. And it's about as blunt as I can put it. Um, I already feel guilty for not being there in the first place. Um, but again, I wasn't the focus. The man is in both deals. The man was not the focus. 100% of the focus is on the female, which and back then that's how it should have been. 4 years later, she had the McDonald stitch because hereditary. She couldn't hold her womb couldn't hold children, so she got the McDonald stitch. But she still started contracting at 31 weeks. We were in Houston at the time, so we went to Texas Women's Hospital. For the first 5 weeks, she was in a hotel that happened to do medical work. I mean, it was just that kind of place. It was that high end, and it was 100% geared to women, hence the name Texas Women's Hospital. And again, I might have been in the room, but as far as they were concerned, I wasn't until my baby was born and until it was in the NICU unit. I was running a restaurant in downtown Houston. So when I got off work, I came home. I got to drive down to the hospital and feed my baby at 2 in the morning. And oh, I didn't think I'd get this emotional, but those 3 weeks were an amazing time. You're in a room with your baby, but there's babies all around you, and every story is not as positive as mine turned out to be. And the women, the ladies, the nurses in that room were just it's amazing. I could not believe how much they had to put up with the whole time you're there, and it was amazing. And then, like I said, 16 years ago, I was at Loma Linda Hospital with my grandson, and again, I was in an NICU unit, and again, once you're in the unit, the child is a focus, but I mean, both parents are the focus, and the support is amazing from those nurses, and luckily, I've always being a man of faith, and I've had my family around me for that support. But you just don't plan for this. There's no planning for this. And as a man, you think you're supposed to fix things. You can't fix this. So, like I said, the support once I was in the NIC unit that's where the real support came from, as far as being a man in a situation like that. And I thank God for those ladies that took care of me, my child, and took care of me.
Thank you for sharing, Gene, especially those small moments that we take for granted, like feeding our baby, possibly for the last time. So I appreciate you for being so honest and vulnerable there. I want to move to Steve, but I will also want to ask, when you were in the NICU, how did the staff address your concerns, and questions about your baby's care, including any improvements and or setbacks, and were there any gaps that needed improvement?
First of all, I just want to kind of make sure everybody can hear me okay, because I kind of joined a little bit late. Okay, excellent. First of all, Eugene, thank you so much for sharing that. That really brought me to tears, and I appreciate that vulnerability on your part. And Jim and Brian, thank you for sharing. It's been 8 years officially on the 4th, and it's still sometimes I still feel like I'm as a dad alone on an island by myself. And when I get an opportunity to hear other dads, whether bereaved or from their NICU experiences, it really reminds me that I'm not alone, and I appreciate you all sharing today. My situation was pretty hectic. My wife was admitted at 22 weeks with severe preeclampsia, and was in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks before her blood pressure became so high that they couldn't give her any more medication. I was actually on my way home to pick my living children up from school, and got a call that I needed to turn around and go back, and that they were going to have to do an emergency C-section. So I really didn't have much time to really think about what was happening, what was going on. When I got back, I was brought into a room with her, put in scrubs and everything, and she was whisked away pretty quickly, and I was kind of left standing there, not knowing what was going to happen. And then eventually, after what seemed like a lifetime, brought into the operating room, where there was what seemed like a million people in there, and machines galore, and they had the drape up, and they ended up doing the emergency C-section, and Liam was born, and severely premature, lungs severely underdeveloped. So he didn't make a sound. They did their work. They prepped him and got him ready to go down to the NICU. And I got to see him briefly before they whisked him away. So what I will say is that many things that were said to me I don't necessarily remember because it was such a hectic time and a lot of stuff just really kind of drowned out for me. But I do remember them telling me specifically all the different things that he was hooked up to, why he was hooked up to them, and that they were going to be taking him down to the NICU and what they would be doing there, and that I would be able to come down and see him at some point. Um, and then, my situation was then went from going from the NICU to up to visit my wife, who was recovering from her emergency C-section, who could not even go down to see him. So dealing with that, seeing my wife in pain, seeing her emotionally distraught because she wanted to see her baby, and me going down there and trying to talk to the nurses and talk to my son and try to encourage him to keep fighting. Our head NICU nurse was absolutely amazing. Um, I would say the only disconnect that we had, and I don't ever want to talk negatively about anybody, but I think if there was a disconnect, it was with us and the main NICU doctor that was taking care of Liam. I don't know if it was an inability to speak to NICU parents when the situation looks dire. His ability to just have that kind of positive attitude. It was just very textbook, very dry, very cold, to the point where we really just leaned on the nurses more than anything. So yes, there was a great support system. It was definitely challenging to support my wife, my sons who were living, and spend the time in the NICU. But without those nurses, I don't think I would have gotten through it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Steve. Um, just any other dads, maybe let's start with Jim. Were there any gaps in communication that needed improvement, whether that be with the nurses, the doctors, any other NICU staff?
For us, our situation, as you talk to more, when you join the NICU club and you talk to other parents who had it so much worse than we did, learning to get over that. But our setbacks were few and far between. But I think the communication gaps that we had first centered around lactation. We had lots of fights with lactation. My wife, the milk just wouldn't come. And they were just incredibly guilt-ridden in their communication. They made it sound like there was something wrong with her, which I just couldn't believe. But I mean, I was still in shock at this point, and we were just trying to get through it because she had so many health issues. And then I think it was Brian who touched on those circular conversations with the MDs. You are already dealing with the fact that, excuse me, that the neonatologists are on a cycle. You have one this week and you'll have another next week. We were at that point where they were trying to push Ian's feeds too hard, too fast. And we were on the route to getting out much earlier than we expected. We went into what Children's Mercy calls PCU, which is when they take out of the NICU, put the parents in the room with the baby for the night. And something was wrong that night. He was just so ornery, didn't sleep, just screaming top of his lungs. And then that's when we were introduced to the wonderful world of neck. And we were in a neck scare. So that extended our stay. And we were really upset with the doctors because the nurses, when we talked to them, they said, well, this seems to certainly be the problem, but the doctors didn't agree. They just didn't think that it was the pushing the calorie count of the formula too hard, too fast. Of course, he wasn't able to have breast milk at all. So those were the areas that need improvement. But I think it comes back to those soft skills, a little empathy. Need to understand that here's your first time parent, and our world has come crashing down upon us. Our life. My wife is 2 hours away from me. For several days she wasn't there, and she was fighting several health issues. She had to go to the ER twice while Ian was in the NICU because her blood pressure was so high. So I think it's just being mindful, asking those questions, and just remember that that these are human beings who are in just a tremendously stressful time. But once again, the nurses, they understood because they're in, day out with the baby all the time. Uh, so that was our saving grace.
Thank you for sharing. Brian, I don't know if you want to add on more.
Sure. I thought that was beautifully said, Jim. I appreciate it. And I can't even imagine having your wife 2 hours away. I mean, wow. Um, yeah, I guess maybe just to dovetail what Jim said is just watch the language that one uses. I know we're all more aware of that these days, I think perhaps than what you dealt with than 16 years ago. We're all here today to try to learn, so we appreciate the opportunity to share and hopefully everyone listens. But yeah, I'm dealing with trying to support my wife now by just little comments, little offhand comments that were peppered into the beautiful support that we received. Yeah, I have to commend RNs especially. The individuals that laid hands on our child and supported him in every way they could, we're forever thankful for. But just little things, we dealt with the same thing, the formula fortifying the breast milk, and well, are you sure you're going to have enough? Just little comments like that. Does that need to be said? My wife is dealing, I'm dealing with that. We're dealing with that now, trying to support her. She luckily, thankfully has enough, but she lives in fear. She pumps 7 times a day, 8 times a day, and she has that constant nagging fear it's not going to be enough. And it
Yeah.
was inserted uh, by inadvertently by some staff members, just offhanded comments. Just watch your language. You just don't know the scars that you will add with already, yes, a traumatic situation. So for us, yeah, it was the breast milk, the feeding. We dealt with the same thing with the neck scare as well. That's where I dealt with a lot of circular conversations. Also, maybe just to add this too, that if they take multiple x-rays of your child, it would be lovely to then have a report, a wet read or something like that. So when you see the staff come bedside, take the x-ray, everyone has a, conferring, and then everyone leaves and no one gives you, and then the RN is not qualified enough, it's not responsible, it can't give you an actual diagnosis and then you start asking for the MD, well, can I, and the fellow runs away from you. Oh no, the MD wants to talk to you. And the MD seems busy all day long by his admission. um, it just, yeah, it's not lovely to then be left for 8 hours wondering, well, what's the deal? I'd like to know. So those kind of little, or at least just communicate somehow through the staff. Everything's fine. We'll go over it more in detail when I can see you. So the classic communication stuff.
Thank you all for sharing. Um, those are really things that we don't think about as staff, because as we talked about as parents, this is our child, and as staff, they do it day in and day out. So just being mindful of that as we work with parents. So I want to shift it to the bereaved dads on the panel for a second and talk about, and we'll start with Gene here. What were the most meaningful ways the NICU staff provided support during your baby's final moments and after their passing? And if anything, what would you have improved with that?
Obviously, my situation is going to be different than Steve's, only for the simple fact that I wasn't there when the baby was born. Like I said, I was an hour and a half south of Fort Worth on a lake. I still don't know how I got there or how they got a hold of me. But when I got to the hospital, like I said, the baby was already born, and the baby was, already hooked up to a machine and in the NICU unit or wherever it was. At that point, I was just, I'm guilt ridden, because I wasn't there, and I wasn't there for my wife at the time, and because I never thought this would happen. Obviously, I would have never left the house. But while I'm in the hospital room, and we're constantly getting updates, how much oxygen they're giving the child. Because I mean, at 23 weeks, there's no way his lungs are anywhere close. Being a boy doesn't help. Doesn't help it either. Apparently, the statistics with compared to boys to girls. But the people, again, it wasn't a great situation, and I think the nurses and doctors know that. And I was fortunate enough to be in a hospital that, with that they were very good to both me and my wife at the time. And again, they knew I wasn't there in the beginning, so I think they kind of held, they kind of, used kid gloves around me because, I'm already guilt ridden to begin with. So I was happy for that, but I'm only there for my wife at that time point, and because you're raised to have, women are supposed to have kids, and you're in a Sunday school class where you're with your husband, and you're surrounded by couples. They're all having babies and with no issues, and all of a sudden you're having a baby and you are having issues. So for me, it was just I was very blessed that I had good people around me at the hospital. And also, I was blessed at Texas Women's as well, even though it was a good story, a good ending in that regards. Um, I had already had a relationship with the doctor because my wife had the McDonald stitch, so I already had that relationship with the doctor. So the 5 weeks she was in the hospital, I had that relationship, and then the 3 weeks my child was there. I mean, so I was in that hospital for 8 weeks. So I was, I didn't have the same issues that Jim and Brian had with that. I mean, it seemed like that like I said, my wife checked into the hotel, and I basically did too. We were there constantly, and they kind of treated us like guests the whole time we were there, and they just like communication was amazing. So I was blessed in that regard.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you so much for sharing, Gene. Steve, what about you? What were the most meaningful ways NICU staff provided support during your baby's final moments?
Um, well, first, let me say that, if you've never experienced it, walking into a room as your son um, is nearing the end of his life and they're struggling to save his life, and all the bells and whistles are going off, and every doctor, nurse, and everybody that could possibly support is in that room working on your son. I think back now, 8 years later, and I think, yes, it was scary. And it used to give me nightmares, the sounds, I hear it in my head. But when I look back and I think about all the effort that it took, like every single one of those staff members to try and save our son's life, I could never thank them enough for the effort that they put in. I think in the beginning, when I was so angry, I didn't think about how it probably emotionally affected them. They have to kind of fake it till they make it, put on a brave face. And I appreciate that because I'm sure it wasn't hard. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't easy for them to be working on such a small newborn, knowing that this could very well be the end. And they wanted nothing more than to save his life for us. And my poor wife had to be wheeled down, so she's sitting in a wheelchair. She can't even really get up to go over. Um, and she had to talk to him from across the room, which broke my heart. And then I tried to talk to him as well. We did everything we could, and unfortunately, with the sepsis, in the lungs, the infection that he developed, and just being so premature, he just couldn't fight anymore. And my wife had to make the decision to just tell them to stop, which I know it had to be the hardest thing she ever had to do. And I had to support her and back her on that because I didn't want my son to suffer either. And what I will say is that thank the good Lord for the bereavement nurse. I never knew that they existed. I never knew what they did. And without her, those next 24 hours would have been horrible, absolutely horrible. And I won't go into lengthy details, but she was there from the moment he passed until the moment we finally left the hospital without our child, and supported us all the way through and made sure that we were going to have all the possible mementos, pictures, foot moldings, you name it, that we could possibly have pictures. And she had helped me change his diaper after he had passed and put on a new outfit. And The hospital, which I never knew that hospitals even did this, they let him stay in the room with us overnight, which I can't even tell you how valuable that was to us. Um, and But yeah, when you know that you're going to be going home empty-handed and you spend 24 hours just basically crying, having the bereavement nurse and the rest of the nursing staff was so valuable. And I know we don't normally say it, but I heard Eugene mention his hospital, but Northwest Community Hospital in Illinois, we have become a big part of the annual events they do to recognize all the babies gone too soon. We've dedicated a brick to our son's name in the garden. Um, we would not have gotten through it without the staff there. So kudos to them. I just hope that we continue to move forward and help dads navigate through this, because just like these amazing men that are in here with this in this panel with me today, I was lost, completely lost, and no idea what I was doing, what I was supposed to do. Thank God for my wife's strength and for the staff that was there. So thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much, all of you. Just taking 1 second to just thank you for your vulnerability. I know how hard it is to recall these memories, so just thank you for being so honest so that we can work to improve the care for NICU babies and the babies that don't leave the NICU. So thank you so much. Now that we've talked a lot about our babies, trying to support our wives while we're going through this, the next question I want to ask is like, how were you as a dad supported during this time, and what follow-up care, if any, was given, resources, support was given to you post-discharge? And I'll start with Jim.
In my case, our number one source of support was my wife's family. They are a very, very close, tight-knit family, and we she opened her home to us. She's about 25 minutes from downtown Kansas City, so she opened her doors to us and our dogs, and we would spend 12 to 14 hours in the unit and then come home, sleep a couple hours, of course, call the NICU every several hours just to check on them and drive the poor nurses insane with our checks. Um, so that, and at the time, I mean, I had a cell phone back then, but we couldn't use it in the hospital. So there was and there was no social media. This was 2008. So my sister-in-law, Brooke, she just, we would talk to her and she would send email updates out to a list of, oh guys, like 120 people. School friends, old college acquaintances, our coworkers. Um, so everything was through email, and I have all of those emails now. Um, and so I believe the second part was the emotional health. That's why I'm here today. I had no idea of the impact on my mental health at the time. I thought this is a hospital stay. We're going to leave. We'll get through it. Um, I always thought that PTSD was something that soldiers got, and only soldiers. Um, it took me 14 years to determine that I was suffering from symptoms of PTSD from my NICU stay. And it was actually after I chose to volunteer with our hospital. Our volunteer group did a tour, and they were just showing us, because it was especially helpful for me because I hadn't been there for 14 years. Look at the things you see. What can we improve? What do you see as a parent that we can do better? I went into the NICU and I walked into D-Pod, which is where my son was, and walked by his bed space, and my mind blanked out. Next thing I knew, I was in the parking garage, and I didn't know how I got there. I didn't remember the tour ending. And our staff facilitator who led the tour, she gave us a warning. She says, every parent who comes back here is different. You don't know what's going to happen. So that kind of drove me to try and make a difference for other dads who've gone through it. And then I started to find resources. I started to research things for what we could do for our NICU families. And what I first started doing was what helped get me in touch with it was I was looking for books to stock in our parent library. Um, and I found a book called Enter the NICU by Rad White. And I heard interviews, and I believe Alex Zavala is on this call, if I'm not mistaken. And I heard that interview, and I decided that I needed to dedicate more free time to doing something that meant so much to me. Um, and then I started grad school. I was working on my master's degree in communication, and I did a qualitative research project. I interviewed 5 NICU parents across the country. That's how I discovered Hand to Hold. They got me in touch with some of these parents that I interviewed. And it was just life changing. These stories that you hear um, just changed me forever. And so I understood. I started attending, I started going to therapy, 15 years after the stress and the trauma happened. Um, I thought that all of my trauma was from childhood. When I was 26, I lost my only brother to cancer. And I thought that was the source of any problems that I had. And it turned out that the NICU had just as profound an impact. I was just too stubborn to own up to it. Because my wife, she's a lot stronger than I am. She'll tell you that I'm the one that cries in movies and that doesn't deal with things. And so it's been helpful. And I think turning around and working with these families and working with mentees through the peer mentor program helps me channel that energy in a better way. And so that's why I'm here today. So, and it's just, it means a lot to sit here with these dads and especially Gene and Steve. Um, my heart goes out to you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jim. What about you, Brian? How did you find support during this time in post-discharge?
Yeah, someone had said it earlier, the male default maybe is to fix things. I'm pretty good with my emotions as well, so I don't get stuck completely in that sort of mindset, but it's hardwired in us, I have to say, speaking for most males. Um, I might have said it earlier, but just to make it more clear, I like to know, like, you don't know what you don't know. And I like to know everything possible. So I asked a lot of questions. I requested, but demanded a lot of consults. And I said that earlier when we were getting further along in our pregnancy there, we wanted NICU to come back down. And okay, so now what? We did a tour of NICU. I think Jim sort of just described that as well. That was helpful. I needed just to physically see it, to know. So it wasn't such a shock to me when being shot out of a cannon that day, you know, uh, trailing my son in an isolate from OR. Um, and then support, I don't know. It was a blur. I'm still trying to deal with it now. I guess I'm the freshest one dealing with it. We're thankful that everyone's home and healthy. I've sought out therapy. I mean, Hand to Hold. I mean, just that's it. Not to advertise or promote here, but we're so thankful for the couple times that we joined during. Taneisha was our moderator, our leader during some of those calls, and we both were thankful. I have to also just say, my wife and I just hung together as a team. I haven't announced here today, but maybe you might have figured out, I quit my job during part of this. We say family first. And so when you're dealing with an employer that doesn't understand or care and made it very clear, said that I was like, okay, well, thank you, goodbye, effective immediately. And so I'm thankful that I had that opportunity, and I live in California, and their support here, with that sort of stuff. I talked to someone about the what is it? Not maternity leave, but paternity leave. Thank you. I got that, but he was still in NICU and it ran out. It's only 8 weeks long. And I talked to the woman there and she's like, well, just take a stress leave. And I was like, well, that sounds appropriate. Sure. So I was able to take advantage of that. And luckily we were able to be a lock solid team together and just get through it together. That's the best I can say now. And I'm thankful for, this here today and other handhold groups.
Thank you so much, Brian. Also a pleasure to have you in my first group, so I appreciate that. What about you, Gene? In what ways, how did you find support during this time and post
Um,
thing?
40 years ago when that happened, again, the only real support I was able to get was basically from my church and from my family. It and then we found out that, her mother, my mother-in-law, had lost 3 out of 5. So we kind of knew what the problem was, and we started addressing that. So once we got down to Houston, we got Dr. Leeds and that relationship with him for basically 3 years, and his staff, and the support from them. Um, as far as after the fact, 40 and 36 years respectively, there really wasn't a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. There really wasn't, an outreach. Um, at the time, Texas Women's was kind of they're kind of one of a kind, and they saw so many, they saw so many mothers and babies. So again, if I didn't have my family and my faith, I don't know how I would have gotten through it. And then 16 years ago at Loma Linda, again, I just, other than the relationship I had with the doctor and their staff, because obviously I had to take them back for other visits. That's kind of the only. There really wasn't an outreach. Um, I came across Hand to Hold basically just driving to work one day and listening to public radio, and they announced, they were basically quote advertising on public radio 10 plus years ago when Kelly Kelly was doing this, and I don't know if I had, I know Jim talked about having that PSD, but how I just remember when I had the opportunity and I heard about that. I mean, if there was ever a quote charity or something that I could do to give back, I thought my 3 situations was a way to give back. And because I mean, when I talk to men, when I talk to men that are in their 20s and this happens to them, they are so lost, and they don't have a clue. And hospitals are so busy now. I don't know what the outreach would be today. It sounds like Brian's and Jim's outreach and Steve's outreach was a lot better than I ever got. Only because I think that um, I hate to use the word industry, but that industry has gotten a lot better. The whole mental health side of this for the man and for the woman, but back then it just wasn't. It was literally non-existent from the hospitals I dealt with back then. But I'm sure it's gotten a lot better. Sounds like it.
Thank you for sharing, Gene. Um, because we have a ton of questions for our dads, which is not surprising. But I do want to ask this like kind of final wrap-up question for all of the dads, and I'll start with Steve. In what ways has this experience in the NICU, post-bereavement, just shaped your outlook on you being a father as a whole?
Well, I often tell people that, my life before 2016 was completely different than after 2016. Unfortunately, not long after losing our son, I also lost my mom to pancreatic cancer. So 2016 was a year that I would love to just forget, but unfortunately, I can't do that. Um, I think that, the whole idea of, PTSD is a very real thing. This whole experience definitely changed me. Our circle of friends and family got smaller because there's a lot of people that just can't handle people that have lost a child, and it's not to their detriment. They just don't know how to handle it. So our circle has definitely gotten smaller. Um, and I just I obviously have a greater appreciation for, my living children. I have a much bigger appreciation for my wife. always knew that she was strong, but after going through the loss of a child, I never realized just how strong of a woman she was, how amazing of a mother that she is. And all the work that she's done from starting a small business in his name to the walks that we do and everything we do to try to honor our son really stemmed from her desire to keep his name alive. And yeah, it's absolutely my desire as well. But as Brian had said, as men, we're supposed to just move on, be the strong ones, and just move on and keep plugging away. So, I really didn't say much a lot of the time. So thank goodness that I had her to say, listen, we're going to do this and we're going to honor him. And that inspired me to start helping other dads through Hand to Hold as a mentor and doing these panels because I know how alone I felt. I know how limited the resources were for dads. And I just hope that we can at least do something to help dads who go through this in the future feel maybe just a little less pain, have a few more resources, and maybe have more men realize that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be mad, and express themselves when they lose a child because there is nothing worse. There's absolutely nothing worse. And I'll just finish by saying my son would have been 8 on the first, so happy heavenly birthday to my son Liam. Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday to him. Thank you so much for sharing, Steve. Um, let's go to Jim. How did your experiences change your outlook on you as a father?
Um, it's certainly we certainly got thrown into the deep end of the pool as far as fatherhood is concerned. Because it was my first child. I think I was just very mindful of everything I needed to do to support my wife, to support my son. Um, Steve, like you just said, I had mentioned I lost my brother to cancer in 1999. I named my son Ian to honor him. Um, Sometimes forget how difficult that was going to be as I dealt with it every day of my life. But I just try to honor his memory in being Ian's dad. Um, and so yeah, it's I think it just, and especially after hearing stories like Steve's and Gene's and everybody, it's when life throws you those curveballs that it could be a lot worse. Um, get through it. Lean on your family, lean on your friends, lean on your faith. Do what it takes to get through and just keep your eye on the prize. My son now, he's 16. He plays football. He's in the marching band. We're looking at colleges. So it, it's been good to just focus on those positives and when there are dads and parents who go through this, help them along the way. Um, we all have our gifts and our stories that we can share, and it's important to talk about it, even if it's hard. You'd figure it would get easier, but it's still hard. Um, and take advantage and point them to resources like Hand to Hold. Um, so yeah, I'm so thankful that I discovered them. Let's hear it for Googling stuff and looking for NICU resources. So yeah, that's how this has shaped me as a dad.
Thank you for sharing, Jim. What about you, Brian?
Can you repeat the question? How does it shape
Yeah,
you
how
as a
did your
dad?
experience as a NICU just shape your perspective as a dad, your outlook as a dad moving forward?
Thanks. Um, yeah, I just try to provide. Also, I hadn't said, but since we were in hospital for 33 days before his delivery, the main thing that we would do, we just start to do it ourselves. I just spared the RNs that I would put him on the monitor, the NST, twice a day. Luckily, she, was off the 24-hour sort of monitoring after some time. Um, and I just trusted in him. What the heck did I know? But he had a strong heartbeat, and it starts there, I guess. And I just trusted in him. I believed in him. Um, I knew he was strong. And I could tell also with like the ultrasounds and this and that leading up to it that he was a little spitfire. He was a strong-willed little guy. There was one that he had a hand up on her waist and then like a fist behind. And I was like, oh, he's not a morning guy. So we could just tell he had a strong personality. And I also just took faith in that. I talked to an old college friend who happened to be at ICU, a NICU charge nurse back east, and she was like, that kind of spirit is good. You want that. And I just believed in him, and I just try to imbue um, our experience there, and just support him, but believe in him, just let him grow. Thankfully, we had the opportunity that he just continued to grow, and he just needed time. And I advocated. We both did, as I sort of described earlier, just as a fierce team. We were probably a team to be reckoned with. We asked everything. We really wanted informed consent. We wanted to know every little thing, not to be disrespectful or nitpicky, but we wanted to know everything that touched our child and went in him and why. We're so, again, I can't praise RNs enough. And even OTs who helped us when we got along to the feeding. So how did it shape me as a dad? Just appreciating the little steps, that the baby steps that lead to the ultimate goal that you want. And for us at that time to get home and just be positive. I had to be the positive Polly in the crew, and trust that it's going to be okay, and just continue to just put that energy out there, and listen to my wife when she had problems, when she had struggles. I would share some myself. And also the other last thing I haven't said here, if you could tell in my verbosity, I guess I'm into trauma bonding. We were in a bay situation in our NICU situation. I've heard some that have more just separate rooms and whatnot. So you're inches away from another family, and you hear during rounding, you don't want to listen. It's private, but you kind of get a sense of what's up. And I reached out, especially there was one dad that was there by himself because his wife was still recovering, and he was there for several days. And I remember that just weeks prior. And I just reached out to him and just said, hey, how you doing? You're not here alone. And we're thankfully, luckily, still friends with 4 or 5 of our NICU neighbors, that we trauma bonded with.
Thank you for sharing, Ryan. Gina, I'll go to you lastly before we close it out.
Well, since she lost her first one, my wife lost her first one, and then we had all these issues with the second one. Even after the McDonald stitch, we weren't going to have another one. I wasn't going to put her through that again. Those are just there's just no way. So Ashley was my only daughter. So she was our angel, and we were just she was so precious for us. And obviously she was an only child, and we raised her, and just again we just wanted to be the best parents we could be. And just that's unfortunately she made some life errors later in life. That's why I have my grandson. She's doing fine now, my daughter, and learned from her life lessons. But it was the time with her, raising her was just extremely special. And it was all because what she fought to be there. She fought to be alive. She fought through the NICU sessions, and just got stronger and stronger. And I think again, Dr. Leeds and his staff and all the people at Texas Women's is why I have a daughter today. And just like all the people at Loma Linda is why I have a grandson or adopted son today. It's just amazing what these people do, and it just makes you the sanctity of life is so important. And so I won't get on that soapbox, but I'm very grateful that I have my daughter and my son today, and it's all because of what the doctors and the nurses did in NIC units at both women's and Loma Linda.
Thank you all for sharing. Thanks everyone for being so vulnerable throughout this session. We could have stayed longer and talked longer. We're so grateful for all of you for just sharing your stories, just so we can strive to just understand how we can support dads like you better moving forward. So thank you everyone for attending. We just invite you to attend our next session on discharge planning. That starts at 2:15 Central Time, where we'll continue to have these important conversations. So thank you again.
Thank you all.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, everybody.